And to actually do on that point, go more on the philosophy. You mentioned how it's more than just martial arts, but it's also how you can apply it to life. What's the philosophy of life, and how do you relate it to fighting or even just the broader martial arts?
So I'll spin this on you as well, because I heard you say something interesting. One of your poems, you mentioned how life imitates art.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So in a similar way, I feel like fighting imitates life.
Go on. I love this. Go on. I'm gassed. Go on.
So all right, let me bring a philosopher in now. So Marcus Aurelius, he compared life to wrestling.
Yes.
While some people compare life to dance, but I agree with him. Life is not dancing, because first of all, in dancing you have a routine. Yes. You have sequence of moves, and it's quite. If you know the routine, you're all right. Life is a fight, you know.
Yeah.
Especially like, obviously you might have it easy in life, but at some point something's going to come around and knock you on your ass. Yeah, so that's why I feel like it's so translatable. The two things that's why fighting's so raw. People love to see someone overcome adversity. There's something like deep about it there. It's like an animal instinct of like, you see two people fighting, it's a lot more than just a fight, because life in the same sense is that same struggle. And sometimes it's brutal and ugly, but it's still beautiful. Yeah, so that's why I like it, because I think
I 100% fucking agree, bro. I think that's so true. And to answer your point, to answer your question before about like life imitates art, I think this is also crazy. I found both things to be true. Life does imitate art, but also fighting imitates life too. Like that's why I think I love both of them. I think I've always loved both the kind of like the struggle aspects of sports, and also the kind of like the writing and like the philosophy and the kind of like literature.
Yeah.
I think fighting, what I learned in jiu-jitsu straight away was it told you so much about yourself. I think obviously, life is lived out there, but it's also lived internal, isn't it? So like, if you're in a bad position in jiu-jitsu and like you're about to give up, that conversation you have with yourself in that moment.
Yeah. I mean, look, that's very true in life too, because if I'm in side control, if I'm on bottom, and like they're rubbing my face, I can't breathe. Sometimes I'm like, why am I even doing this?
Literally, why did I come here?
Something myself here, you know, like you got some, especially like big black belts. I'm literally could do nothing.
You're like twisted, you know.
This is peak. But then you come out of that session, and like it's like going through the fire, and you come out the other end of it. In the moment, it might feel like look great, but you're like, no, I'm happy that I came.
Yeah, I went through that, and I think that's so important. That's so true to recognize that. I think a lot of life is pattern recognition, right? But I think where we left off was that we were talking about philosophy and how that applies to fighting, and how it applies to life, and like all that kind of the duality of that. So you mentioned before we actually started a point about the duality of man, and how philosophy is so important, and all these how these philosophers like Socrates and Plato and Aristotle, how they were integrated wrestling into their life and how that affected them.
Yes.
Talk to me more about that. What did you learn about that? Why do you think it's important to be also kind of physically competent as well as mentally competent?
I don't even think it's important. I think it's primary. Like, it should come before anything else. You know, obviously, like in life, sometimes it might not always take form of physical. You know, but usually that should be a starting point, especially for like young people. Again, like Plato said before, anything, a young person should wrestle, which I think is really deep. Especially as like he wrote commentary on society as a whole. You know, in Plato's Republic, that was his whole focus of how could we best construct society. So like he was very influential in, you know, providing commentary on how society should run and politics should be, you know, structured. So the fact that he had so much emphasis to place on wrestling, I think speaks volumes to how important it is.
Yeah, 100%.
And educational.
100%. I think like we spoke about before, a lot of it is you're wrestling with yourself, and I think that's what Player is trying to say. Like you're in those kind of difficult moments where you're physically, and I learned this all the time through jiu-jitsu, but also through running, where you're physically doing something strenuous, and like you have to tell your body, no, I'm in control.
Yeah.
You stop when I stop.
Exactly.
You know, like your mental, you're basically giving up, but you actually haven't had a conversation with yourself. I think that's so important for life because it translates to life, you know. I think I've mentioned this to you before we started, how it's like there's a stereotype that you ever have to be like a big jock who's stupid, or like a scrawny like philosopher who's smart. And it's like, no, like you said, it's primary when you merge the two. I think that's what we're missing today as a society. I think there's too much of like one thing, like you just go gym all the time and you don't know anything about anything, like, and you don't know any like other like, you don't have any literature, or you just always, all you do is if you think too much and you don't do any action.
Yeah.
I think the integration of both is so important for the human spirit.
Oh, mate, I love that you brought in spirit too. Spiritually, it is just as relevant. But in ancient Athens, wrestling was like a common, and I don't know if this is actually true, but I read that Plato often had discussions at mat side, the team rounds.
Just yeah, dude, we gotta do that.
That's crazy, and like the stereotype again, like you say, of that, like the void between, okay, I'm a philosopher, or I'm a sort of intellectual, and I'm a fighter. It was never like that in ancient Athens, and Plato's name was the broad-shouldered from wrestling. So like, you know what I mean? We don't know his real name. We know his height and he's deep, innit? Yeah.
That's crazy.
And then also Jordan Peterson, he wrote a book called Wrestling with God. Same concept of like, regardless of how you choose to define God, ultimately it would be a big decide on how you perceive reality and how reality is fundamentally structured. And so that picture of wrestling sort of, I think, is great. In Jacob wrestling with God as well, it sums up what life is all about, because you're not going to come out unscathed. Sometimes in life you're going to have to suffer and sacrifice things, but that's the point. Yeah, so
100%. And to build on that, actually, I remember I've not read Jordan Peterson's book, but I've read this book by Jung, where it's like answer to Job, and he's like, because I think Job, he's also wrestling with God, and he wrote a book about the answer to that kind of the aspect of life that we don't understand. That is just kind of like, it's like, how can God do this? And we have that kind of perspective, And he wrote this book about like just like the spirit is needed to go forth in a world like that, in a world where not everything is going to be understandable, in a world where there's gonna have things that happen to you like, I can't believe this happened to me. What did I do to deserve this? He's like, well, no, you have to have that indomitable spirit to have that conversation with the world at large, and that's what wrestling with God means, right? Wrestling with the ideal of the highest ideal, and going like, okay, this ideal, like you're so ahead of me, you're so far ahead, but like, how do I go from here to there?
Yeah,
and like having that conversation with yourself.
Yeah, mate. Yeah, exactly. That like in pursuit of that highest ideal that you're chasing, that's almost the reason to keep going.
100%.
Whilst it's all difficult, and for someone it might be their kids, some of it might be pursuit of immoral progress. That's right. It might be pursuit of moral progress, or it might be pursuit of being a great fighter. Ultimately, though, it's the same struggle.
100%
at the base principle level. So
100%. I think also I'm trying to tie all these points together. I think it's so important too, because I think the idea that Plato had about always striving to kind of wrestle with these ideas, I think that's why it's so important. I mean, it's obvious, right? Like, if you have a strong body, you have a strong mind, right? I think to kind of bring it back, I have a question I have for you is that, like a lot of, I think a lot of what Jordan Peterson touches on too, about how this kind of generation, we struggle with that kind of like wrestling with that idea. We struggle with what Plato was talking about when it comes to, kids wrestling with life, Why do you think that is? Why do you think, I know you've been in fighting since you were a kid, so you kind of seen the other side of that. Loads of people have not been in that. They've kind of been at home playing video games, and there's nothing wrong with that, but they lack something. They lack something that you kind of gain, that kind of understanding that you've gained. What is it? What kind of understanding have you gained about, that aspect of wrestling, kind of aspect of fighting, and how that helps you as you get older and older?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Yeah. So I think a lot of it's, again, tied in with meaning, and sort of the meaning that you get from life, and the meaning that you're told about as a kid of what life means, and also the call to adventure. Jordan Peterson talks about a lot. So like, it's hard for a kid to get up and want to battle with these ideas when they haven't even been told why they're having a utility. I mean, I don't think a lot of kids are educated, first of all, on fighting, like Plato wanted to have been, and secondly, on philosophical ideas and on morality and on God and all of these questions that a lot of people should. It's just not a must. Obviously, some people aren't interested, but I feel that these are like a fundamental questions.
100%. Great.
And they give you reason to get up in the morning, So as a kid, that's like major important. Role models is a biggie too. I think a lot of modern day kids struggle with having the right role models around them. You know, I'm fortunate enough to have had, you know, a good dad and, you know, good people around me, a good gym. Martial arts has been massive in formulating how I think and how I approach situations. A lot of kids don't have that. So maybe we should put it in the curriculum.
Literally, no, it's like, I completely agree, because like you mentioned, that kind of community, that role models, like a large part of what I found when I went to jiu-jitsu was like a group of men who they have real lives, you know, they've got like families and they've got actual jobs and all these things, but they still dedicate every single week, like, you know, 3 times a week, however much, to come and train. And like, you know, they're very, very, very good at this thing, you know. And I think that's so important to have that idea. You can see like how that's going to help them, how that helps. And you see, especially if you're in that environment as a kid, you know how to conduct yourself with adults, you know, who there's no bullshit there. You know, it's like, if you're good on the mat, you're good on the mat. You know, it's like, that's all that matters. It's like, there's no like, no one, doesn't matter what you do outside of the gym. It's like how you are on the mat. I think that's a lot about life, you know. It's like, you can take that, a lot of the lessons we talked about today, you can take that and, you know, apply it to life.
Yeah.
Speaking about on the mat and how, you know, there's kind of things you learn at the beginning, I want to talk a little bit about training right now.
Yeah.
And how people can develop. You know, I think it is a good through line, so we should always refer back to philosophy. I think that's a beautiful point that you made. But talk to me about at the beginning of your training. What did you struggle with? What part of your game did you have to learn? Did you take more time to learn? Or what part of the game just came naturally to you?